Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
California's rugged and scenic northwestern corner is the beginning of the great Pacific Northwest. A region of untamed and primitive beauty.
And the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department has now joined efforts with the Arcata Police.
Growers living off the grid. Humboldt County also has the highest rate of missing person cases in the state.
Where 60% of marijuana is grown in the United States.
There's a lot of evil here. A lot of evil.
This is Kinda Murdery, and you're entering the Emerald Triangle. Wow, that was nuts. Hey everybody, welcome to Kinda Murdery. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. Today, we're going to stray outside of the Emerald Triangle for a story that begins in another corner of the great Pacific Northwest. Granted, a more urban and populated corner, but still home to temperate rainforests, breathtaking wild vistas, and more than its fair share of strange, even bizarre paranormal legends, bloody fables, and riotous humanity. I'm speaking, dear friends, of the Kinda Murdery and mostly misty metropolis of Seattle, Washington. Although, for today's story, the emphasis should be more on the kinda than on the murdery. That's right. We're going to take a break from the wholesale homicide and instead tell a paranormal, a spiritual story, or perhaps simply an all-too-human story about frailty of the flesh, vulnerability of the mind, and the slings and arrows of social reprobation. We're going to tell the story of Ruamai Rude. Yeah, that's R-U-A-M-I, Rude. Like, why you gotta be so rude. But I have another title for you that might be more illuminating. How about Occult Baby Custody Battle? That's right, Occult Baby Custody Battle. If that doesn't at least make you curious, well, I'm not going to blame myself. Before we dive into the weird and inexplicable, or perhaps just mundanely explicable story of toddler Jedi Ruamai Rude, I've got to introduce you to my guest today. Returning to Kinda Murdery is old school legend, painting paladin of the Knights Templar, traditional outdoorsman, mighty Michigander, Lord of the Longbow, the miraculous love child of John Little and Robin Hood, author of Life and Longbows, an indispensable work of literature for the modern archer. Also a work of philosophy and instruction, but mostly a damned enjoyable autobiographical romp that can be devoured even by those of us who are not primeval hunting fetishists. That's right, Nick Viau from the Traditional Outdoors podcast is here. How you doing, Nick?
I'm good. God damn, do you want to write my next forward?
Sure, I'd be honored. I love your book, dude.
Man, that was something right there. That was that you really put me over with that one. Hey man, I'm doing good and I'm happy to be on here. Third time's a charm. It's gonna be my best one.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for coming back. 2 more times you get the 5-timers jacket like SNL.
You better make it big.
Oh, man. Well, I do appreciate full disclosure, I love having Nick on, and usually I'm sort of texting him, calling him, emailing him, and like whining and wheedling until he agrees to put up with me for an hour or two. So, Nick, thank you for your perseverance and forbearance. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Hey, no problem, man. The first time you always get a hold of me, I'm always like, oh, yeah, you're thinking, oh, yeah, you just want to do this sometime. Anytime would be cool. And then you follow up twice, and I'm like, oh, he's serious. He really wants me to do it this week.
Yeah. Well, you've got a wonderful vocal quality or something. But anyway, I had a question for you. And people from Michigan are called Michiganders, right? I got that right?
Yep.
So does that mean your wife, or if I don't want to, target your wife for this, any woman from Michigan, would that be a Michigoose? Does that work?
I've never heard of that. That's never happened. No.
Oh, no.
No Michigoose or geese. that I know of.
Everybody gets the "what's good for the goose is good for the gander" reference, right? Yeah.
Oh, for
okay,
sure.
right.
But Michigander it's a fun one though.
It is.
I like to say it.
Is.
I write it often because it's just so unique.
It is wonderful. Here I am rolling out the waterfowl-based dad jokes to start the show. That's probably a great idea. You guys, if you hear me sort of coughing or some such a little bit when I laugh, fighting off my first cold in 2 years. Thankfully, it's not COVID. I just got a good old-fashioned regular coronavirus cold, because the cold's a coronavirus too, I guess. So anyway, thank goodness for that, but bear with me. I apologize. Now, Nick, moving on from Michiganders and my respiratory system, I mentioned I love Life in Longbows. Amazing book. I'll be honest, even though we're buds, it took me a while to read it because I used to be kind of into archery when I was younger as well, and I had a couple archery books, and they were all very much sort of instruction manuals, either for actual archery, like the physical part of it, or for the necessary mentality, sort of the find your calm center and hit the bullseye. And so I very much incorrectly, when you told me about your book, Life in Longbows, I thought it was going to be a little bit drier, more of a hunting manual for an aspiring traditional outdoorsman, and I just wasn't sure that was me, and so I kept meaning to read it. But finally I did, and let me tell you, this is a fantastic book. Like, don't think of it as specific to archery or traditional outdoorsman. It's really the story of a awesome dude, Nick Viau, growing up in Michigan, becoming an adult living in Michigan, but it's very fun. It's full of humor. It has a little bit of a Kesey, sometimes a great notion vibe in the best way. I recommend it to anyone, whether you like archery or hunting or people from Michigan or not. Even if you hate all that stuff, still a great read. So that's my review of Life in Longbows. And you are now, the reason I bring it up is you're working on a new book, right?
Yep. I mean, my whole stick is kind of the celebration of the ordinary. I am a writer who happens to hunt and fish. That's my thing. I've got lots of friends that are fishermen and hunters who occasionally write, but I am a writer who likes to. I just enjoy everything that I'm doing. I'm very experience driven, and I don't do anything fantastic like go to Africa or go to Alaska or anything like that. I'm a family guy from Michigan that likes to hunt whitetail deer and likes to fly fish. I mean, that's just what I am, and I think there's a lot of people like me all over, and all of the reviews are a lot like yours. They all say the same thing. I enjoyed the you part more than I enjoyed anything else. It's a 10-year odyssey of my life is pretty much what it is. It's a memoir, and I kind of pigeonholed myself on the first one, and just because, it was very much a traditional archery book, but there was so much more than that.
Yes.
Yep. So,
right.
But there's not a whole lot out. I mean, it's a very niche audience, and there's not a lot of literature out there for it that's not instructional. A lot of it is that what you're describing, or people doing really great things, and it's more of a journal kind of thing, and they happen to collect them all and put it into a book. This isn't it. And the next one's not like that either. And I'm a lover of outdoor literature, and I love funny outdoor literature. I love funny and meaningful outdoor literature. I like Robert Rourke and McManus, and I like stuff like that are just, really makes you laugh, makes you think, and really talks about the connection.
To be fair to your book, by the way, in case anyone listening is in fact a traditional archery wonk and hasn't read your book, there's plenty of that in there too, and I think you can learn a lot from it. That scene in your book where you get your first bow and Steve Angel is teaching you sort of repeatable motion, how to draw it, how to find, I forget what it's called, but essentially a spot on your face to return to.
Steve did teach me it all, man.
When I was learning to shoot, nobody really taught me with that thought of a single repeatable motion, which really makes sense because it translates across pretty much any sport you might do, whether it's baseball, basketball, or whatever. It's all about muscle memory and repeatable motion. And for whatever reason, when I was learning archery, nobody really articulated it to me like that. It was kind of like knock the arrow, pull it back, aim, and shoot. And I thought to myself, gee, if somebody had broken it down for me like this, I might have been more into archery too. I mean, I think very often with sports, and maybe especially outdoor sports, there seems to be this almost subconscious correlation with your overall manhood and competence, or at least there was for me. Sort of like, hey, if you're good and if you're tough and if you're awesome, you're just going to start slinging arrows downrange and be pretty good at it. As opposed to, and it sounds obvious now that I say it, the fact that it's a skill that you can learn and practice and do in a repeatable way that you can continue to improve on. And I think that sort of thing comes through really clearly in your book too.
Yeah, it does. I very much fumbled through the whole process. I didn't even want to hunt when I started. In fact, I was pretty much anti-hunting when I started. I wasn't into it. My uncles all did it. It was the beer camp kind of thing, and I just wasn't into it. I grew into it, and I grew into my love of the outdoors, and it happened late in life when I was like 27 years old, and I had never hunted in my life, and I jumped right into the archery element, and, you know, it did escalate quickly for me. I had great mentors. Steve Angel, actually, my podcast partner, was a mentor later on. I'd met him when I was like 5 years into it, but I had some great mentors when I was younger. My dad's neighbor and a couple other people, younger as in 27. I'm 40 now, but you know, they really kind of worked me through it and showed me that everybody does it a little bit different. But the whole book is pretty much me fumbling it through my way into the whole thing and growing as a hunter, as a late onset hunter. That's basically what it is.
Late onset.
Yeah,
hunter.
and I've
like
heard it.
that.
I've heard it described that way, and I'm kind of unique in that regard because I came into a lot of guys that come into traditional compound hunted or did whatever and decided they wanted it to be a little harder, and they jumped into it that way. Me, I just went whole turkey, both feet, you know, blind into it and had to find everything out. And, you know, the web wasn't what it was either, so it wasn't quite as good. But if you don't mind me jumping into the next one, the next book I'm working on, that's like part 2 of that. And that book is called Clumsy Predators. And it opens with Man is Nature's...
Great name, by the way. I'm going to read that one for sure.
Yeah.
Clumsy Predators, everybody. Look out for it. Now, is it going to be on Amazon when it comes?
It will be.
Where can we get it?
It will be, yep. And I might have it on lifeandlongbows.com, too. I'll probably have some for sale signed. But I'll mainly it'll be on Amazon. But, you know, I open the book with Man is Nature's clumsiest predator, and I'm the clumsiest one. That's the opener to the thing. And that's where I got the idea for it. And that one is going to be a continuation of where I left off with the other book, where I still have the same kind of short stories, but there's more youth stuff worked in. There's fly fishing stuff because I just started fly fishing too, and I bumbled into that the same way I did the other one. So it's more of an outdoor book, but it's more about growth, and it's more about not taking yourself seriously. So that's what that one's going to be about.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that there's sort of not in a heavy-handed way at all, but there is sort of a philosophical, emerging self-awareness and self-improvement element to your writing. Now, not in such a way where it could be kind of obnoxious, where you feel like it's Tony Robbins reading you the poster in an executive's office. But I think one of the things that's wonderful about your stories is that you sort of organically take us through this personal growth and set of realizations along with the skill sets that you're building and the interests that are evolving for you in a way that's really relatable, and I think can create a path for other people to gain skills and self-awareness, etc. So I really appreciated that about your writing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You know, one other thing, you mentioned that you are a writer who happens to hunt. And that resonated with me as well because, and I don't want to describe you when I'm describing myself, but I know that for myself as a kid, I was very sort of intellectual and, I mean, nerdy, geeky, read a lot, drama club, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, which we both still play, all that stuff. And it really never occurred to me that traditionally, let's call them manly pursuits, could ever be in my purview, even if I wanted them to be. I would look at my father and my grandfathers and my uncles, and I would see these sort of stoic, extremely competent men who would help you survive the apocalypse. And I thought, well, I'm more of like smart but otherwise hapless kid. And I feel like a big part of growing up was the realization that I was actually a lot more capable than I thought, and even capable of doing things that had seemed previously impossible. And I felt like maybe that's a little bit what you were speaking to when you called yourself a writer who happens to hunt, and that also that sort of realization of competence is part of the story behind Life in Longbows. Can you speak to that at all? Am I onto something here,
No,
or am I just kind of riffing?
No, you totally are. You are onto something. I had a proclivity for it. I definitely did. And it developed. And I think where I'm coming from that also is that I think when you come into it from, like, my success has always been the story I get out of what I do. So I can't have a bad day in the woods or on the water because I'm there to enjoy it. I could care less about at the end of the end game. And you pick up things as you go with this experience, and while you're enjoying it, part of that enjoyment is figuring things out. And I'm very much I'm a lifelong learner in that regard, and I always try to. My goal is to kind of approach everything I do through the eyes of a beginner, because the most wonder you will ever find in anything is the first time you do it. And a lot of people want to skip by that, and they want to go right to expert, especially in the world of the web. Everybody wants to get on social media. They start something, a year later, they're a pro. There's no in between. They don't want to show you their mistakes. They don't want to, they don't make light of themselves. They just want to get on there and they're experts, but you're missing all the good stuff. That's all the good stuff. And
right, it's the old life is or success is a journey, not a destination, is basically what I hear you saying right now.
Yeah, exactly. If you go out there and you miss a deer the first time and you say you're done, that's it. And people will go do that. They'll start this game, this pursuit, and they'll have they won't have success. They'll have a bad experience, and they'll go back to what they were doing before and say that's not for me. It's because that's a success-driven person. They're the whole point of them being out there is they want that deer in the freezer, that fish in the net. They want that success, and they get frustrated if they don't get it. I've just never been about that. Sure, I have frustrating days where, if you spend enough time away from your family and spend a bunch of money and get nothing for it, that gets frustrating sometimes, but it's few and far between.
That time you had a hypothermic nutsack from standing in the river too long, fly fishing, that day was frustrating. No, I'm kidding.
Actually, I got a really good story about that I will tell later.
Please do. I hear you, and I think also, though, that perhaps you have a resiliency advantage as an outdoorsman because you're a writer. Because if you're going out there to get the best story possible, very often, in fact, perhaps more often, the more entertaining, better stories are when things go wrong.
Always.
If you go out there and you're like, yeah, I was out there for 15 minutes and I shot a 5-point buck and I dragged it home and we had venison steaks, that's not a story. But if everything goes sideways, that's a great story.
The best stories that Steve and I still talk about, Steve Angel, to this day, are the worst ones we've had. And we've had a lot of bad hunts where it rained, things went wrong, people got lost, we dropped things. I mean, I've got a story I'm working on right now for my book. The last chapter is actually called The Identity Thief, because I literally shot a deer and lost all my shit. My ID, my wallet, never did find it. I had to replace everything. And
that
stuff like that. But that's, I rolled out of there with that title and I was like, I'm great. This is great. That's what I needed. I ended my book, and that's the way I always look at it. I'm good at finding experiences and getting the best out of those situations, which is funny because my wife always tells me I'm a pessimist, but when it comes to this, I'm not. I'm very much an optimist.
I love it. And when you say that you and Steve talk about now, is this on the Traditional Outdoors podcast?
Yes, I've told a few stories on there. But Steve and I are always riffing on stuff that we've done and laughing about it, and with our friend Tom, and it's been great. It's been a great thing. But yeah, we tell stories like that all the time on the show.
So Traditional Outdoors Podcast, available on wherever you get your podcasts. Pretty darn fun show, even if you're not a hunter. And now, let's jump into the Occult Baby Custody Battle, huh?
Yeah, let's do it. Can't wait.
The story of Occult Baby Ruamai Rude. Born at the end of 1924, in the last days of the do-nothing presidency of Keep Cool and Keep Coolidge President Calvin Coolidge, Ruamai Rude may have been a magical, mystical, toddling Jedi master. But no matter if they're a hapless muggle or up to their eyeballs in midichlorians and wielding the Force like a scalpel, or sucking down frog eggs like Baby Yoda, every child's life story begins in the same place. It begins inside their mommy's tummy. And so, Ruamai Rude's story is truly the story of her mother, Emma Nelson. And the obvious question being, who was Emma Nelson? Well, in 1924, same year Ruamai was born, Emma, or Mrs. Anton Nelson, was a housewife, married to a successful businessman named Anton, and mother to 2 young children. She's described as a young woman with auburn hair and smoldering eyes. And like many of her fellow bourgeoisie in the 1920s, Emma became fascinated with the occult. Now, Mr. Nelson had no interest in the dark arts, spiritualism, or the occult, but Emma had a fever, and the only cure was more occultism. That's a cowbell reference, everybody. Any Christopher Walken or Will Ferrell fans out there? I couldn't leave it out.
You had to. Low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely, man. How many times have you seen that sketch?
Oh, I can't even count. I love Christopher Walken.
I know, me too. My gosh, I feel like it's a rite of passage for men of our age. Shall we get back to the story of the Occult Baby Custody Battle?
Definitely, I'm hooked.
Ruamai Rude? What a name, Ruamai.
Ravishing Ruamai Rude. I wonder when he joined the WWF.
Wait, is Ruamai, was that a guy?
No, but Ravishing Rick Rude was.
Oh, right. I mean, Ruamai is this name where every time I know I'm about to have to say it, I feel like I'm driving a wagon being pulled by like 18 horses, and if I can't make the perpendicular right turn onto the gravel road, we're going to go right off the cliff. It's like, there's a lot of anxiety attached to spitting that name out.
What birthed that name? Like, what? I mean, the only Ruamai, is that like Rue the Day? Like, somebody like to say that, and they were like, well, let's put a Maya on the end of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the sort of name you have when you're born during a harmonic convergence of the planets and destined to be a great occult sensei. I don't know.
It does sound like it sounds like an occult wizard. Like,
yeah, it does.
With a hillbilly sensibility, because then it just ends rude.
Right.
Maya Rude.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds like that. Or it's like the female version of Damien. Like she's the girl Antichrist, something like that, right? I mean, and I think that's kind of what she was set up to be, perhaps. So let's get back into it.
Go for it.
So I'm just going to do the little 15-second rewind like we're watching a Netflix show. And I think the last thing I said was that Emma had a fever, and the only cure was more occultism. She found herself led by an otherworldly power to write music and poetry, skills she did not possess and arts she was not capable of except when communing with said otherworldly power. Then one night, she had a dream that she would meet a great occult teacher, and mere days later, she met San Francisco-based tailor Robert Roode, who was visiting Seattle and was, miraculously and obviously to Emma, the exact cult leader her magical dream had foretold. Now, as I just mentioned, Anton Nelson, her husband, had no interest in the occult, but Robert Roode did. And there's the answer to part of your question, Nick, where Ruamai Roode got her name. The surname was her father's, San Francisco-based tailor Robert Roode. So he loved the occult, Emma loved the occult, and so...
Robert also loved dad ass.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he did, and she loved the Roode boy. Emma abandoned her family and ran off to San Francisco with the little tailor that could speak to the dead, occultist and cult leader Robert Roode. And once in San Francisco, she joined his cult, which Emma proclaimed boasted among its membership at least one prominent judge.
It ain't legit unless you have a judge in the group. I mean, I feel like you have to have a prominent legal figure in your organization to be legit. Like, somebody's got to take care of your shit when it goes down. Like, you need an attorney, you need Saul Goodman if you're going to have an occult, or a cult in the occult.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you need somebody who could pull some strings to get the penalties lessened or dismissed off of your members, right? Absolutely.
Or like a good accountant to handle funds. Like, you need all that. I feel like your recruitment in a cult has to be spot on.
Right. It's basically like putting together Ocean's 11. You better lay the foundation with a bunch of highly trained and excellent professionals that can handle all the flack that's coming your way. That's what I hear you saying.
Yes. This sounds like Amazon.
Yeah, right, exactly. In college, we used to play this fun game, which was if you were going to put together a street fighting squad for like the apocalypse or Escape from LA or something, who are the people, not necessarily the specific person, but from which walks of life would you want to build your street fighting battle squad? And for me, the answer to that was always, I know I want a hockey player. I know I want a professional bull rider. I was really into the PBR in college. We used to watch it a bunch on the OLN network. And it was always these dudes who weren't necessarily physically imposing. I mean, a lot of them were actually kind of small guys. But you'd see them ride these 4-ton bulls, get bucked off, get trampled in a manner that I'm rather certain would have killed or crippled me. And then they just like get up, wave their hat around, and jog out of the rodeo ring. I mean, those have to be the toughest mofos in the entire world as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and they're usually broken down, and I don't know how they can, and do it way too late into their life, and I'm not sure how that works. Like, held together by, like, the little bit of cartilage that they have and sutures.
Exactly. And by the way, this may seem like a hell of a tangent, but this is all related. It's metaphorically the same thing as you better build your cult from the ground up with a judge and a lawyer and an accountant.
You can't, yeah, exactly. You can't just have a bunch of pregnant chicks. you gotta have everything else.
You need Ray Donovan. You need them all. Here we go. Back to Ruamai Roode. Well, Anton Nelson, prominent Seattle businessman, when his wife abandoned him and their 2 young children for the San Francisco cultist Ann Taylor, he divorced her. But the loss of a husband and the absence of her children did nothing to deter Emma from her occultist path. She and Robert Roode decided to produce a, quote, super being. She referred to it in interviews surrounding her custody battle for her daughter, in fact. So apparently appearing incredibly sane and rational was not high on her list of priorities. She and Robert Roode decided to produce a super being, a child who would grow to become a great spiritual teacher and who would be born under perfect occult circumstances. Brought into the world when all the planets aligned, in that heavenly instant when Bill and Ted and the Wild Stallions from San Dimas, California, played those perfect harmonies and brought everlasting peace and evolution to the universe. I kid. I made that up. I read a lot of primary newspaper articles from the 1920s. Nothing in there about Bill and Ted and the Wild Stallions from San Dimas. Although there could have been because they had a time-traveling phone booth. But she did talk about how this child would be born during a spiritual convergence when all elements in the universe were bent towards imbuing the child with maximum power. And for some reason, I just pictured Bill and Ted like windmilling their guitars and lighting the planets.
This is some Rasputin shit, man. Like,
yeah, it's bonkers. Truth is stranger than fiction.
An occult super soldier. Plus, you can't dabble in the occult. I mean,
right.
It's not just something
you gotta go for it.
you just don't say, I'm going to try this out. I don't know if it's going to be for me.
Yeah.
You kind of got to jump right in, and I guess if you're going to do it, you might as well just have a superhuman occult baby and just go the whole way.
You're right, though, because when the I'm just going to try it out threshold is like sacrificing a black lamb at midnight and speaking to the dead. I mean, most people are going to be deterred before they dip a toe in that particular water,
And I always find it fun. It's kind of fun to think of what that point of no return might actually be for some people when they're into that kind of thing. Like,
right.
Like, well, we just killed a man with a scalpel. I think there's no going back.
Yeah, might as well just push through and eat his brains now, right?
Just keep going, because now it has a purpose. Before it was like a crime. Now it's like a blessed event or something.
Now it's canon. Yes. You mentioned Rasputin. Is it just me, or I'm pretty sure that I've seen this on the internet. Isn't his junk in a pickle jar somewhere? I think that's true. I think that Rasputin was supposed to have been so well endowed that they actually pickled and saved his manhood for posterity.
I actually think I read that in like a clickbait article somewhere or something. Like, they killed him like 6 times. So
right.
I guess you might as well preserve his junk if you're going to kill a man 6 times and he's still not dead in different ways.
Yeah, go Google it. See if I'm right. I think I am. And, if you feel a little insecure, just remember that over 150 years of sitting in liquid, it's probably going to be a lot of swelling that happens. I mean, you ever put one of those sponge capsules in a glass of water and 2 days later it's a giant dinosaur? That's the deal. Don't worry about it. You're good. Okay. Back on track. So they decide to bring a super being into the world under perfect universal harmonic circumstances, and they're going to create this being through the combination of their spiritual energies. Emphasis on the spiritual, not physical, and we'll return to that in a moment. And so, as a result of their psychic romance, little Ruamai Rude is born. The next fact of this story actually, to me, plays into the possible legitimacy of the occult and Ruamai's dark powers, because shortly after her birth, her father, Robert Rude, goes insane. And I'm not making that up. He goes insane and winds up as an inmate at the Agnew Asylum. According to Emma, he goes insane as a result of, quote, too close of an association with the powers. So as much as we're laughing about all this and, these wacky kids and their crazy beliefs, next thing you know, they associate with the powers to bring an occult super baby into the world, and flying that close to the sun fries Robert Roode's brain pan, and he loses his mind and ends up incarcerated in a madhouse. So let's rewind those giggles a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
It wasn't syphilis.
Well,
I mean, he did start a cult. He is into the occult.
That is true. Usually these, like, the leaders or even high-ranking members of a cult, they have special rules where everybody else gets to have no sex at all, but they get to have sex with everyone.
And that's what I'm thinking. Like, usually, not that this happened, but I'm just saying, this guy, for one thing, he believes in, he's all about the occult. He just goes around doing whatever, trying to make super babies, and all of a sudden he goes insane. I mean,
right.
You don't do anything once.
Yeah. It's a good point. And I've always wondered, talking for a moment about real life, more serious situations, but how are these double standards of behavioral rules not a red flag? I mean, I get that you can be brainwashed and everything, but I mean, Heaven's Gate springs to mind in particular, where the guy said, okay, I get to keep my junk, but the rest of you have to cut yours off.
Right? I mean, it's like that's not even an exaggeration, because the stereotypical cult leader is usually this dude that just does whatever the hell he wants without ramifications.
Right.
And he's like the only sane one in the entire group. Well, he's actually insane, but he's convinced other people to be insane, so he's actually the sanest insane one.
Right. But how is that? I mean, I can see going along with a lot of weird stuff, but how is you cut your junk off, but I keep mine? How is that not like a bright red line in the sand? How is that not where you just kind of go, okay, whoa, maybe I've fallen in with the wrong crowd here. So anyway, back to our 1926 Colt. He goes insane and winds up as an inmate in Agnew Asylum. However, shortly after Ruamai was born and before he was committed, Robert entrusted the care of little Ruamai Rood to Mrs. George Caldwell of 1421 Kane Avenue in Berkeley, who raised the child as her own for almost 2 years before August of 1926, when Emma, who was employed as a waitress in San Francisco at the time, decided she wanted her baby back. Nothing is communicated in anything I could find or anything I read as to where Emma was or how she felt about Robert giving Ruamai to Mrs. Caldwell in the first place. And I have some thoughts about that as well. There's an entirely different underlying explanation for all of these events, or I should say possible underlying explanation for all of these events that I'm going to tease you with now by not telling you and get into a little bit later. There might be a reason for all of this occult activity that is other than the reason stated. And that's what I want you to think about as we head into the home stretch of this particular story. So it's said of Ruamai, and I saw her photos, and it's true, or it appears to be true, that the 2-year-old girl was uncommonly pretty and preternaturally intelligent. So perhaps during the dark ritual that drove her father insane, some special powers, some ancient wisdom or intellect from the squid gods was imparted to the little girl. So here's what happens. Emma goes to court because Mrs. George Caldwell wants to keep the baby. And she fights hard for her baby. So hard, in fact, that she sets her pride aside and does what she has to get her baby back. By which I mean she reconciles with her husband. He, somewhat surprisingly, but I suppose to his credit, is in fact willing to take her back, comes down to San Francisco from Seattle, and during the court proceedings, not in the courtroom, but during the days in which the court proceedings were occurring, those weeks, he remarries his wife. She obviously has a history of somewhat unstable life choices between abandoning her family and joining a cult and having a demon baby. All sexism aside, one can see why a judge might be hesitant to return custody of any child to Emma. So when Anton is willing to reconcile with her and remarries her and reunites her with her existing children, she suddenly has a foundation of much more familial stability upon which to make the case that she ought to have custody of Ruamai returned to her. Meanwhile, Mrs. George Caldwell loves Ruamai, wants to keep Ruamai. I mean, it's a little bit of a heartbreaking story here. She's essentially been this infant's mother for 2 years, and she's fallen in love with this little girl. And she feels, rightfully so, based on a lot of the evidence, that Emma is probably not the best choice as a mother for Ruamai. Doesn't have a history of either physical, economic, or mental stability. And she goes to war to keep Ruamai. She hires multiple lawyers, one of whom is named Mr. Blood, which I just thought was incredibly fun and evocative. Because remember, we've painted this picture that Emma is this wild cult member, and here Mrs. George Caldwell is the stable, loving mother of Ruamai Rood. However, Mrs. George Caldwell is the woman that Robert Rood, the cult leader and avowed occultist, entrusted care of his child to right before or right after he lost his mind. So, to me, like, if you were raising the Antichrist and you believed in Satan, and I'm not saying all this occultism is the same as being a Satanist, but the point is, you would entrust the rearing of said Antichrist to a dyed-in-the-wool Satanist. So as much as Mrs. George Caldwell in court goes after Emma for being a mentally defective cultist and therefore not a fit mother for Ruamai, it seems to me almost certain that she, in fact, is the dyed-in-the-wool loyalist cultist who believes in the teachings of Robert Rood. That's the logical conclusion, if you ask me.
So wait, who's Mr. Blood? That's her associate?
That's just her attorney. And I thought to myself, if I was writing a novel and I had a character that was essentially like a woman from Roald Dahl's The Witches, where she seemed like the sweetest adopted mother in the world, but in truth, she was the arch maven of a society of blood-drinking Satanists, your first little bit of foreshadowing as to that truth would be when her attorney, Mr. Blood Esquire, announced himself in the courtroom, right?
It's pronounced Blood. This is the best sitcom ever. Like, not a sitcom. Well, it could be a sitcom, but this needs to be like a series on Hulu. This is incredible. What a swerve.
Right? Lending further credence to the idea that it's actually Mrs. George Caldwell, even more than Emma, who is a dyed-in-the-wool occultist, is Emma's own testimony where she says that one of the main disagreements that she had with Robert after the birth of Ruamai was that once her child had been born, although she still believed in the spiritualism and the occult, she also had a mother's instinct that it would be better for her baby to be raised more or less in a normal way, as opposed to being groomed to be the grand master of some dark cabal of soul eaters.
You got to have humble beginnings, man. You can't just give him all that. He's going to be a brat then.
Yeah,
or
totally.
She's going to be a brat then, excuse me.
Right. So that was a key area of disagreement between Robert and Emma directly after the birth of Ruamai and before he delivered Ruamai to Mrs. George Caldwell and then went insane and ended up in the asylum.
Dude, we went from Omen to Hellboy. Now we're into Harry Potter.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, you're right. You are right.
Like, you could take this stuff straight out of movies. Like, this is straight out of movies. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, these plots.
Yeah. So here's what happens. Once Emma remarries her husband and promises to return Ruamai to a normal life with a bucolic family in Seattle, it looks by all accounts that she's going to win the custody battle. when, to everyone's surprise, Mrs. George Caldwell, who's been fighting this battle tooth and nail the whole way, employing attorneys named Blood and everything that we've talked about, says in court, oh, yeah, no worries. I'm happy to just give you the kid. You can have the kid anytime you want. And everybody kind of goes, huh? But then Emma says, okay, great. And she goes and picks up the baby. And the moment she has the baby, Mrs. George Caldwell's attorney walks over and serves Emma with a brand new lawsuit asserting that, okay, you have custody of the child now. That's not what we're fighting over anymore, except you shouldn't have custody of the child because I'm accusing you of being mentally unfit and physically unfit and an unfit mother in all ways. So wily Mrs. George Caldwell, the moment she saw the sea change and realized that she was going to lose this initial custody battle, gave up her claim on, I guess you could call it, primordial custody of the child, and instead said, okay, it's your kid, it's your custody, except I'm going to now challenge that custody in court on the grounds that you're an unfit mother.
Whoa.
Yeah. So she just did a little shuffle step legal juke, and now they're right back to square one.
You know, being 1926, I'm surprised the judge didn't just throw it out and be like, yeah, but she's married. She's got a husband now, so it's all good.
Well, it's funny you should say that because, spoiler alert, after a little bit more rigmarole, that is essentially what happens. So initially, the judge grants her motion and goes so far as to grant a restraining order against Emma, a restraining order to keep her away from Ruamai on the grounds that she's a dangerous and unfit mother. But upon reflection and a couple more days in court, and because of exactly what you said, she's married now, she's reunited with her children, her husband, Anton, has promised to adopt Ruamai as his own, the judge grants custody back to Emma and throws out the restraining order. And that is the story of the occult baby custody battle. However, there's one more little piece of mystery or perhaps just social observation that I alluded to earlier that I'd like to unpack now. And that is my assertion that perhaps there was another explanation other than all this occult stuff for what was actually going on here. The whole time I was researching this story, it just didn't quite make sense to me. Because here's this mother who, although she's a little quirky, she's not the one in the asylum. And she's running around asserting that her child is this result of communing with an otherworldly spirit and a creature of great strength and etc. It's 1926. We're not too far removed from the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s. I mean, it's a long time ago. And you're essentially running around doing interviews in the newspaper telling everyone, my baby girl is a witch, right? And it just doesn't make sense to me. Why would a mother want to put her child behind the 8-ball like that? And there was another assertion that Emma made repeatedly in the newspaper and in the courtroom. And it's one that I haven't mentioned to you yet, but I'm going to tell you now. And what she said was that another area of disagreement between herself and Robert Roode, other than whether or not Ruamai ought to be raised as an ordinary child or as the daughter of the Dark Lord, was that Ruamai came to being because of a ritual that she and Robert did together, a spiritual ritual, but that Ruamai was the result of her communion with an otherworldly energy, with an otherworldly being, not with Robert Roode. And that Ruamai therefore was hers and hers alone. And he, Robert, had no claim on her. And that apparently pissed Robert off a lot as well. And again, I was sitting there scratching my head, wondering, what is she talking about? What is going on here? Because, and Nick, I'm sure this is true for you as well, I took it as sort of a given that she and Robert had bumped uglies and made a baby the old traditional way. Like, I thought it was just kind of an occult woman self-aggrandizing, but I didn't really put much stock in it. But still, as I mentioned, there were things about the behavior in this story that just didn't quite ring true to me, that seemed strange, that seemed like not what a person or a parent would do. And it wasn't until I ran across an entirely different article from an entirely different time involving an entirely different couple, an article from the LA Daily News in 1944, almost 20 years after this occult baby custody battle. Different city, different couple, decades later. And it was a story about a couple from Pasadena who had an occult baby. And that's when everything fell into place for me. That's when I realized that occult baby was basically a euphemism for illegitimate. It was a loophole in a time when many people believed in the occult to avoid admitting that you'd had sex and a child out of wedlock. So all of these declarations about the magical occult baby was really a way to get around fessing up to the obvious physical truth that you had cheated on your husband or cheated on your wife, and the result was a, excuse my language, bastard child.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's where I said maybe the real explanation to this is much more human and much darker and much more to do with frailty of the flesh and the tragedies and difficulties of social reprobation and all of that. Because it would have been blasphemous to go around proclaiming that you were the Virgin Mary and had given birth to the Messiah, a child of God. So you can't just say, I'm the one virgin mother in human history, because we've already proclaimed that child to be God.
Heard it.
Right, exactly. Heard it, and you're going to get burned at the stake. So if you can't have commune with the Lord, but you don't want to admit that you cheated or had sex out of wedlock, well, you had an occult baby as a result of communing with the spirits. Because as harsh as our society can be on women, apparently being a bride of the devil sure beat being a plain old, unfaithful, derogatory name.
Man, that's so... It's even darker thinking about it that way, because it's almost like you want it to be an occult baby with the supernatural powers and all the other thing, and believe all this story, and then when you just find out it's somebody just being dirty and just covering up, infidelity, and
I know, right?
It just feels awful. What
I know, right? That's I got so sad when I kind of figured it out, because here you are. Ruamai feels almost like a superhero, like she's Anakin Skywalker, she's the one. And then all of a sudden, you go, or maybe what really happened was Emma was a little bit into the occult, ran off with this guy, her life went totally sideways, she got pregnant, the guy went nuts, and so her best path forward was actually to proclaim herself a true believer and announce her child to be the daughter of Cthulhu, because that madness was actually more socially acceptable than, yeah, I cheated on my husband and had a baby out of wedlock.
So, did you find out any more on Rumaya?
I did not. I could find nothing further.
So, unremarkable. So she's told for however long. I wonder if they kept the ruse up after all of this and just kept saying, "No, you're a child of a spiritual communion. You're special. You're really special." And then like first bad grade in school, and like, you're not really special. You're actually you're you're illegitimate.
That's a rub. I mean, it's interesting because in her court testimony and in the articles where she was interviewed, even as Emma is promising to return Ruamai to a normal life, she's still very clear and very firm that Emma is an occult baby and the result of communing with spirits. And I think that's because she realizes that this return to normal life, if she, along with that return, lets go of her belief in the occult, it undermines the entire quote-unquote more virtuous explanation for Ruamai's existence. And one gets the feeling that she's going to want her husband, at least through denial and on the surface, to buy into the whole spirit baby story as well.
Ask your mother. Hey,
Right.
how would you like to be this guy? Seriously. Like, Anton. Like, you know, so he gets back, whether he's like, you know, he's got his crazy ex-wife moves away. He's like, but I need a mother to these kids. The kids want their mother. She's willing to come back. She's got some Satan baby. You know what? Yeah, I guess that's just what I'm going to have to deal with. Comes back in, finds out this is all bullshit. Now he has to deal with it. He not only does he have this weird Brady Bunch situation, he has to deal in occult connections and everything's
the Hades bunch.
Yeah, exactly. and then he's got it. Then he finds out that it is all bullshit. He has to keep up the ruse for his insane wife. Or his insane ex-lover, I mean, in this kid.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's
sucks.
madness. I mean, yeah, I think what this really says, this says everything about how difficult it is for a single man to raise multiple children.
It's okay, I either raise these kids or I deal with this.
Yeah, I'll basically put up with anything if you'll just come back and help me herd the cats. Okay, to be fair, this whole darker, sadder, more mundane explanation that I have presented, this is just all my own logical fitting of the Lego bricks together. I found no primary documents that said this was actually the deal. But what I did find, because once I found the Ruamairu story, when I'm researching, I'm basically searching for keywords in a newspaper archive, right? So I was searching for Occult Baby, and much to my surprise, because when I first found Ruamai, I thought, oh, this must be like the one Occult Baby custody battle that ever happened. And what I found instead was that from the 1800s all the way up until almost the 1950s, there were alleged occult babies popping up in the newspaper all the time. Not all the time, but enough times that I found many of them.
So it was a thing. An occult baby was a thing.
It was the go-to explanation other than I banged some dude who wasn't my husband. That's my takeaway. That's how I understand this all to make sense.
And it does, yeah. So you said 1952. You said it stopped.
Well, 1944 was the last one I found.
So in 1944, they're like, "This is bullshit. We ain't gonna go with this anymore."
Well, I think that belief in the occult subsided a bit.
Yeah.
And it's funny because just last night on Kinda Murdery Insomniac, I did a story about occultists and fortune tellers. And this one particular flim-flam guy, the story I told was from the 20s, and then he reappeared in the 1940s in Los Angeles, and by the 1940s, fortune-telling in the occult in LA had actually been made illegal, so he got arrested for fortune-telling. And so it seems to me that belief in the occult, which was pretty widespread around the turn of the century with the Fox sisters and Houdini and up through the 20s and stuff, I think it really receded in American culture. If I were to guess, I'd say it was probably because Adolf Hitler was such a true believer in the occult that it became distasteful for Americans around World War II.
I was just thinking that same thing, like, you know, dehumanizing and the whole thing with what was going on in Germany and making a villain. You're just like, okay, Hitler believes in the occult. We're not going for that anymore.
Right. Yeah. The middle 40s, all of a sudden, no more occult baby articles unless it was in a movie or a TV show. But before that, a bunch of them.
That's wild. That's just a wild story. That is not where I thought that was going to go.
Well, you're listening to Kinda Murdery. Let's mix it up a bit. Nick, can you tell us a story that's maybe has a little more spiritual light to it?
That's a tough act to follow there. I can definitely How do you follow Occult, baby, with an outdoor story?
I don't know, but I want to hear it.
That's
I
possible.
want to hear an outdoor story. Don't you have like a freezing your nuts off story? I mean, I feel like you promised me that earlier in the show, and we must have some listeners who are still waiting for it.
It's almost that. I'll tell you quickly. I'll summarize a fly fishing story that's in Clumsy Predators, and it's called An Unwelcomed Hello. I'm not gonna read it to you or anything because it's not quite done yet, but I'll tell you about it. So, my second year of fly fishing, I was invited to trout camp up in Grayling, Michigan, which is like a mecca for fly fishing. I mean, this is the Asable River and the Manistee River are infamous trout rivers.
So this is like the Augusta National for fly fishers. That's what I'm picturing.
Kind of. I mean,
Fly
there's
fishermen.
a lot in Montana and whatever too, but I mean, Michigan is like the Asable and the Manistee are the most well known for trout rivers and streams. So, I'd wanted to go up there. So I had a friend that had a cabin up there, and an archery friend, and they invited us up there to have camp. So they let me join them. So my buddy Rob and I, jumped into his truck, and we got it after work, and we headed out there. They'd already been there since Wednesday, so we were kind of coming in on the tail end. But this was my very first trout camp. I've done deer camps, I've done all that, but this was trout camp, and I'd never done anything like that before. And
so does this mean you're going to be taking lessons and things? Like, expound on why it's called camp.
It's just camp. It's just literally when you just have a camp, it's just you just hang out, you drink beer, and then in the morning you hunt fish, whatever. You eat really well, you tell jokes, you have campfires. It's just camp.
Oh, so this were friends of yours? I thought it was going to be like some almost like a Sturgis biker rally.
No.
Okay,
there were a lot of people there, but I mean the Asable attracts a lot of people during the start of trout season. But basically, it's just when you get invited to a camp, it's a pretty special thing because they're opening their door and saying, "Hey, you're one of the boys, come in or girls,
I gotcha.
and you're coming in and do this." So
someone's got to like you to want to camp with you. Sharing a tent is a very personal thing.
And they kind of merged later on. Some of them have been to hunting camp. We've kind of we're just a group of friends, but. So I head up. I'd never fished the Asable, and I'd wanted to, and I'd heard about it, and it was early in my journey. So I was like, yeah, I want to go. So Rob and I jumped in the truck, and we went down there. And my buddy Rob, we actually call him on Traditional Outdoor Podcasts. We referred to him as Bob Bones, because the joke was, I'm not going to tell you who it was, but it rhymes with Bob Bones. It's my buddy Rob Jones. So
got it.
Rob's just this larger than life guy. We get along really, really well, but he's always having a good time. He's got a heart of gold. He's just one of those guys. You see him and everybody knows about Rob, Mr. Social Rob, so it just funny dude. So anyway, we get there, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to all you can eat fish buffet at a little cafe called Shirley's in Kalkaska. So we go there and we're having an all you can eat fish buffet. And then we're going fly fishing, which is catch and release, which is hilarious to me because I'm just like, here we are, we're eating all this like perch and cod and all the tartar sauce and all this stuffing ourselves, and we're not keeping anything we're catching.
The good wild fish.
Yeah.
That's what us bait fishermen are thinking right now. So
it's just exactly. So it's just a weird kind of not that trout are great anyway because they're really not. Like, but those fish is.
Oh, trout for breakfast is delicious. I beg to differ there. But anyway, continue.
Well, for trout to be good, I won't go into details, but yeah, you kind of got to bleed them quick and get them on ice and, all that. They're better to eat around a fire, like right after you catch it.
Yeah, grilled for breakfast. That's what I
absolutely
like to do.
Yep. So anyway, so I get there and I stuff my face at Shirley's. We're there, we're in like a food coma. We're like, we're going to hit the Manistee and we'll fish tonight really quick. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we get there, and the first thing I realize when we roll into camp right before we were about to head to the Manistee is that I didn't bring any waders. It's Michigan. It's cold. I'm not freezing.
What time of year is this?
This is around this time of year. This is getting into
those rivers are gonna be
like May. Well, actually, it'd be more like May or like May, but it's cold. You're not going into
snow flow. Yeah,
so yeah, up there it is. Yeah, so it wasn't snowing then, but it was cold. There was no way I was gonna freeze my nuts off in a river, without waders. He just even Rob was like, it's a little cold for that, bud. I don't think that's gonna work. So I'm like, okay, well, what do? We go to Jay's Sporting Goods and I buy another set of waders. $90 I didn't want to spend for this cheap set of waders. So it all starts off with that. So I get down there, I got this neoprene set of waders that are just hot as hell and heavy waders because I got cheapies and they were heavy. So we go down to the river, and I don't know what you call them there, but when you have silt build up in a river, you get these muck holes where it's just black silt. And it looks like it's solid sand, and when you step in it, it's like quicksand. You shoot down.
It's just like a sinkhole.
Yeah, you don't know when you're gonna stop, but it's underwater.
Oh my God!
So you're just like, oh God, and you're like,
I wish the waders went up to my neck.
Right?
Yeah,
So it's like 2 feet deep of water, but
Yikes.
you're sinking, and I'm up to my nipples already in almost water.
Oh,
I'm like
no.
trying to climb
and
out of there.
Your nipples are hard as diamonds.
So I'm sitting there, and everybody's kind of watching me like, oh, what's he doing? You all right there, bud? You got to climb out of there, and I'm like trying to play it off like, yeah.
Plus, you want to make a good impression because you just got invited to trout camp.
And I already forgot my
time.
goddamn waders, so I'm like, I don't want to be like, now I'm having trouble because they said don't go in right there because it's silty, and I'm thinking, oh, whatever. I just walked in there and I sank.
And you were overcompensating for forgetting your waders in the first place, and you were like, you guys don't know.
So, yeah, so I get there, and what I ended up doing is I don't want to spend too much time on this part, but what I ended up doing was I just I turned to the right and then flipped to the left and pulled like a football swim move. Like, I ripped my arm really, really fast up and pulled it.
You gave the river the Heisman?
Yeah. Well, my boot pulled out of the muck, and it just made this, like it released, and then I got shot forward out in the middle of the river onto a sandbar and went chest first into it. And I was all wet, and everybody was laughing at me. And then, we fished that night. It got dark right after that, and I was freezing. And then the hilarious part about that part of the story, other than that, is, and I go into more detail in the book, but at night when you cast a fly rod, you can't see what's going on. You usually hear a rise and you cast.
Did you fish hook Bob Bones?
No, I did not. I actually, and it might have happened, but I snapped my fly off on the second cast because I had too much back cast and I didn't realize it. So I literally fished for an hour and a half with nothing. There was no fly on the end of my, and I'm not getting no bites. Nothing's happening.
Oh my God, that's a metaphor for something.
Right?
I don't know what.
So I got out of there. I got out of there, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even have a fly on my line. That's awesome. And it, they're laughing. I probably got it hung up in an overhang or something. But so the story goes on. It's just a calamity of errors. But the funniest part of the whole of this whole story is the next day we got up and it's raining, and we hit a couple fly shops and we head out and we put in at this place called Mills Landing. Or no, Mills Landing's actually a restaurant I really like. I can't remember where this landing was, but it's a famous landing in Manistee or in Grayling, on the Asaba, I mean. And there's not really a whole lot of places you can put in there, and I don't mean just on a boat. I mean climbing in's okay, but to put a boat in, that's the only place you can do it, because around this river, parts of the Asaba is just framed by these thick, nasty overhangs, these tangles of roots and stuff like that from the eroding bank and mud and big old balls of pine roots and stuff like that. Serious obstacles. If you get under them, that's awesome, but if you get caught up, you ain't getting out. You ain't getting your fly out. So anyway, these two brothers are up at this launch, and you can tell they're brothers. I got brothers, you can just tell they're brothers. And you could tell that one of them had his shit together, and that was the oldest one, and the younger one was a complete moron. I mean, or at least just happy to be there, high on
Always
life.
have the older one taking care of stuff.
Yeah,
for him.
and the other one's got,
learn.
you could tell the other one packed everything up. They'd been planning this for a while. So the other one's all naive and happy, and the other guy's, he's kind of more serious. He's getting all his stuff ready. I got the I'm behind schedule look. This idiot's keeping me back. I really want to get in the water, that kind of thing. And they got 4 fly rods, 5 fly rods. They got dry bags. They've got food. They're loading all of this stuff into this kayak, or not kayak, but canoe. Big difference. But they loaded into a canoe.
No,
so
that doesn't bode well.
Bob Bones is in the water right in front of them on the landing. I'm 15 yards upstream fishing a point, and I had passed all these overhangs and stuff, and I'm like, oh, they're putting a canoe in. That's pretty crazy over there, that's going to be something, and I got front row seat. Like, I can just see what's going to happen. So Rob's very social. Well, on the side of the canoe, they get the older brother's on shore. The younger brother's got it. He's holding it. He's in the back steering. Why he put the younger brother, the naive one, on the back steering, I have no idea. But that's a pretty crucial spot to be in a canoe. You're literally steering.
It's easy to flip. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, geez,
so he gets in. Rob's right in front of him, like talking kind of to our other buddy John, who was with us, and basically one side of the canoe said Rogue River, Michigan, and that's where we fish. So we were like, oh, the Rogue River. So all I see is they're launching this canoe, and the older brother pushes off. He's in the canoe. The younger brother's in the back holding the canoe. They're just about to go. Well, in front of them about 10 yards is one of these ginormous root balls that is jutting 4 feet out into the river. And if they don't turn that canoe to the left, they're going right into that canoe. Or that
and
root
only
ball.
The happy-go-lucky idiot younger brother who's having too good of a time and blissed out on life could possibly not see the giant 4-foot root ball sticking out of the river.
He might have seen it had Rob not said something. So they're getting there, and they kind of nodded the whole time, and then Rob goes, "Hey, Rogue River, huh? Yeah, we fished that river too." And and he's like, and the younger brother turns all the way around to acknowledge that Rob is there and say, "Yeah, we're from the Rogue." And then as soon as that happens, they're floating downstream.
Oh my God.
The older brother's in the front heading towards his doom. Like, he sees it coming. There's nothing he can do. He's doing the limbo. Like, he's got, he tries to lay back in the canoe and lay, but there's no laying underneath this thing.
And you can only steer from the back.
Exactly.
So there's literally nothing he can do except dive out into the freezing ass water.
Exactly. So he's going, the only thing I can do is limbo back into the canoe and hope we go under it or something, but it wasn't happening. It was like the Titanic iceberg. It was below the water, jutting out. So there's no going under this thing, right? So, okay, so the younger brother, the older brother starts flailing and going, whoa, 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 whoa. And, so he runs them right into this pine thing. And the older brother gets scraped up and he's getting just gnarled by these roots, and the canoe flips because there's nowhere for it to go. So,
oh no, and it's all raw. It's all Bob Bones' fault.
And it spills all their shit into the water. So you've got $500-$600 fly rods, reels, dry bags, which they meticulously packed, all floating there, and they're in the current now because they're moving towards the bend, so they're in the worst part of the river because it's just rapid.
God,
so
this is like a Chris Farley movie. In case anyone's not picturing it as clearly as I am, it's literally a Chris Farley movie, and Bob Bones is Farley. Oh my God, this is amazing.
And Rob is sitting there slack-jawed, like, like, I can't believe this is happening. And
did he realize it was his fault?
Oh yeah. Oh, and so anyway, they go running, my buddies. I'm sitting there and I'm froze because I think this is hilarious. I've got my line in the water and I'm watching them struggle to try to get this canoe and all their shit from going downstream. And so one of them's holding the canoe, one's grabbing their stuff, the canoe's filling up, their stuff's all over the place. They got $100 rods floating downstream. I do nothing.
Are you openly laughing at them? Like, can they tell you're just sitting there?
I have a stupid grin on my face like
show?
I do right now, and I did nothing. I just stood there.
Yeah.
So John and Rob are like 10 yards up back. They're running upstream to try to help these guys out. And they like tackled the canoe and pin it. And they're like, "Oh, little help here?" To me. So I go walking across the river and I grab the canoe and I'm sitting there and we're trying to help them get their shit. I'm right next to the older brother who is wet and livid. Absolutely livid. Wants to strangle his younger brother. And I'm like, man, that's unfortunate. And I just...
It's like thousands of dollars worth of gear that just got soaked. Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, what's really unfortunate and what's really bad is when your stupid fucking brother, who's supposed to turn the canoe and steer it, doesn't do anything and starts talking to the guy in the river and dumps all your shit. And he just starts flipping out and yelling, and his brother's two people down, and he hears this whole thing, and he's on shore now trying to pull the canoe up, and he is just red and looked like a whipped dog, and absolutely just, dude, they just roll out, they just start this trip, and they immediately put this canoe in the water, And yeah, we felt bad, but we laughed so hard when they left. Like, it was like one of those things that was just what a National Lampoon situation to be
it's
in.
amazing. And now they're headed out for like a week of basically camping and canoeing, just the two of them together in the woods, just hating each other's guts, right? That's the second half of the movie.
Oh, my ass would have gotten out and gone back to Shirley's. I'd have been like, yeah, we're done. But anyway, that's a pretty funny. There's more that happened to that story that involved a creepy old man too. River tour guide that ends it, and I'll go into that just because I have to now because it's kind of funny.
Sure, yeah, please. You can't say creepy old man and then not tell us.
Well, we get all the way down the river and we get out. It was a couple mile stretch, and we caught nothing. Maybe one little fingerling fish, but it had been raining. The river was soupy. You're just not gonna catch anything. But we wanted to be there because we were there. So we get out, and there's a guy walking a terrier on, like, this old man, like he looks like Willie Nelson, and he's got this little terrier, like this little purse dog, and he's walking it around and he's watching us. And we get out, and the group of us, and now
first of all, weird to have an old man with a purse dog in like fly fishing town, Michigan. You might expect like a black lab or a golden retriever or some kind of a bloodhound, some kind of hunting dog, or just other dog. But when I think of purse terrier, I think of like Kardashians and Hiltons.
A little bit bigger than that, but more like my dad's got a Westie Terrier, which is like the stout, stocky terriers that have an attitude. Well, that's kind of what this guy was like walking. So he's up there, but he's watching us, and we're like, what is he doing? So we get out of the water, and we have a couple more guys with us now. We had some friends that were coming up behind us, and they, we had about 5-6 guys. So we get up on there, and we're waiting for somebody to go back and get their truck and come pick us up. So we're all just standing around talking in our waders and stuff, and this old man's not leaving, and we're like, what's this guy doing? And well, it turns out he's like this old grizzled guide, like, for the river, and he lives right on the river, so his stuff's right there. And he starts shooting the shit with us. And, he's saying some pretty funny things. He's like, the secret to being a good trout fisherman is to dress in dull clothing. And he's like, you're okay. You're okay. Skips me. You're okay. You're, and he keeps going around the circle, and he's just imparting all of this knowledge to us, that these weird things, like, and he's like, talking about all this stuff. But the funny part is,
dress in dull clothing. Why? So the fish looks bigger when you take the photo?
No, it's because they can apparently see, like, they can see bright stuff, apparently. Like, if you're
dull. I thought you said doll.
No, that's my Uper accent. It's
DOLL. Yeah,
doll clothing.
Okay,
doll.
You started out with creepy old man,
doll
so I thought he was
clothing.
gonna try to get you guys to dress up like little Lulu.
God,
or
I wish
something.
that was the case. That would have made for a better story. But anyway, so there we are, and all of a sudden the old man, we're like, there's got to be an angle here. Why is this guy talking to us? Sure enough, he wants to sell all of his stuff. He's no longer going to be a fishing guide anymore. He's like, we got to go back to the house because I'm telling you guys, I got some good quality shit. And that's exactly how he says it. And he keeps saying it like, this is good quality shit. Somebody's got to buy this off me. I was a fly tire for Cabela's and all this stuff. He's just, so we're like, all right, fine. We'll humor him. We go back to his house, and he goes inside. He disappears for about 15 minutes, and we're like, is this guy coming
like
back
Hansel
out?
and Gretel. You never go back to the fly tire's house. You're going to end up in a pie.
Right? Well, we were curious. So he comes out, and he's got this duffel bag filled with stuff. And he opens it up, and there's like, fly tying stuff's expensive, like soft hackle, like stuff from birds. It's all from birds, like farmed birds. So I mean, it's expensive, like $55 for feathers. I mean, for a pack. I mean, it's not cheap.
No, right.
So he's hauling this stuff out, and he's like, he while he's doing it, this is when it kind of gets funny. Well, it was funny the whole time because you have to see this guy. He kind of talked like George Carlin, too. So if you can imagine a cross between Willie Nelson and George Carlin, that was this guy with a little dog. Like, it was something, man.
So, Willie Nelson with a pissed-off attitude and a teacup terrier. Got it.
Right. And he's also wearing 2 what appeared to be rollerblading wrist guards.
I'm sorry. I would like to apologize to you, Nick, for my inability to really laugh, because I would be laughing so much, except I'm hacking up a lung when I try, but continue.
Yeah, he's wearing these black rollerblading wrist guards. Like, they're either rollerblading wrist guards or, like, my dad used to wear those bowling PBA professional, like, bowling wrist guards to keep your hand.
Kingpin,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's got these things on him. We're like, what's going on with this? And he's having a hard time. Like, he's fumbling through and he's dropping
he's got
stuff.
carpal tunnel from tying the flies.
You would think. So this is what happens.
Oh, no.
So he drops a whole bag of soft hackle, fumbles it, and it gets into the wind, and there's feathers everywhere. So we're like,
oh my God.
So
and these are like $50 feathers.
yeah, dude. So he's like, oh God. And he goes, so it's all over the ground, all over everything. And he goes, hey, will you boys mind picking all this shit up? I don't got any bones in my hands.
What?
And he says it just like that. So we're like
just
trying,
as though that's just a normal thing to say.
Exactly. And just all gruff and just like, I got any bones in my hands. You know, he's got this thing. So we're like, we look at each other and we're like, we got any bones in your hands? And he goes, well, it turns out he was a Navy diver and got in one of those, like, you ever seen that movie with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Robert De Niro where the guy's name's Cookie and he's the Navy diver and he loses his leg and he's gotta try
Is
to...
it from like pressure down deep or something?
Yeah, well,
emulsifies his bones?
No, what happens is he's on top of a boat and like something breaks free and he's getting out of the water and it cuts his leg off.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, it's terrible. So he's trying to, with a prosthesis, trying to be a Navy diver where they wore the big heavy suits because takes place back in the day. Well, anyway, it's a good movie.
Right.
I can't
so
remember
what
the name.
happened? What happened to the guy?
He apparently got his hands crushed underwater doing something and was a veteran and he literally had no bones in his hands. They were crushed. Like he had to put them back together so he could no longer... Like, I don't know how he tied flies after that.
Yeah, I was going to say, he tied flies after that or before that?
Apparently, I guess it just got really bad later in life and he couldn't move anymore.
Oh my God, this is horrible.
Yeah, it was kind of sad, like the story you told earlier.
Turnabout is fair play.
It was hilarious until we found out that he would, serving our country, he crushed both of his hands. But just, dude, you just had to have been there with the way it happened. And all of this happened in one trip. Like 2 days, and this is my life.
Wow.
Like, this just happens, this stuff. Like,
this is great stuff, man. It's so good.
Yeah, that just went over the edge. And one of the things he'd said, too, is he's like, we were all standing around and we're smart asses, and the guy was like, he had this old leader tin from Orbis, and he's like, you can't even find these anymore. These are super rare. This is probably $75 right here. And my buddy's got his eBay on his phone, and he turns around and he goes, oh, funny, I just found one for $10.
Oh, man.
One of those things. Oh, dude, I would have picked that guy's brain for hours because this was like one of those true characters where you're like, this guy is a character. He has seen the 60s. He has done some things. He was a Navy diver, like... long time guy.
Nam. Yeah,
exactly.
Totally.
Like this is like, I mean, you could probably, I'd want to see the whatever show this guy was the star of. I mean, this was awesome. But it's your typical Michigan great character, your typical Michigander, if you will.
Michigander. Yeah. Well, I will absolutely be reading the book when it comes out. That's Clumsy Predators by Nick Viau. It will be available on Amazon and lifeandlongbows.com. Not out yet, though, so in the meantime, get ready for it by reading Life and Longbows, which I personally recommend heartily for all the reasons we've already touched on. Nick, it's been so great having you here. You're a wonderful storyteller. You're an amazing writer. You're a great friend, and it's super fun to just hang with you, man, and talk about crazy crap. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to talk to the Kind of Murdery audience, and thank you for letting me hawk my wares.
Oh, dude, I'm hawking your wares. Honestly, Nick wouldn't have even mentioned any of it. I made him because that's how much I like the book.
Yep.
And so, For Nick Viau, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
Kinda Murdery, The Emerald Triangle is created, researched, edited, produced, and hosted by Zevin Odelberg, with opening theme by Niall Madden and art by the Gin of Lang. Available now on all podcasting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.